The Outsider podcast shares the opinions and analyses of Drew Landry. They are his thoughts and his thoughts alone, and do not necessarily reflect every member of his audience or newsletter readers. Now, on with the show.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Outsider Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Drew Landry. And folks, thank you so much for making this the best politics podcast west of I-35 in the Lone Star State. So however, whenever, and wherever you are listening and or watching, and I have got the video going this time, please know that I'm incredibly grateful for your attention. In today's episode, I have findings from a recent poll on the U.S. Senate race in Texas and a trend that happened in July with the polling in 2026 that didn't happen in 2018. Then I have an interview with Dr. Arelia Johnson on her new book, Hijacking Equity and the Fight for Justice, that's set to be released next month in September. So this is quoted straight from her website. It says, anchored in her original theoretical contribution, Distributive Justice, and the practical application of joy is strategy. This is a practitioner's guide to language, liberation, and leadership in a time of fear. That's a little book jacket type of blurb on her book called Hijacking Equity and the Fight for Justice. We will discuss many of the topics in which she's an expertise, and I'm really interested about how she argues that joy is a tool, not a reward of justice work. So that will come in the next section here. But before I get into her interview, I want to talk to you about the recent poll that came from Texas Southern University's Barbara Jordan Public Policy Research and Survey Center. This was released this week. There was a poll released last week, two that were released last week, on the Senate race between Democratic State Representative James Tallarico and Republican Attorney General Ken Paxton. The poll, the TSU poll, has Tallarico leading Paxton by about 2 percentage points. The margin of error within this is 2.8%. Now, you may have heard of margin of error in some regard. Let me just give you a refresher as to what that means. Margin of error in polling is the expected range of difference between what a poll reports and what the true value in the population likely is. So it reflects a random sampling error. And so the natural statistical wobble, if you want to think of it like that you'll get when you take a survey of some sort of a sample instead of doing it with everybody. It's really difficult to get every registered voter and every likely voter in the state to do a poll. So you have places like TSU and the Texas Politics Project and the New York Times. You get a lot of these media outlets and universities will conduct a poll that's representative of the people. All right, so you have you realize what a percentage of the population is, and you try to get a poll that's reflective of that. That said, if someone holds a lead that's inside the margin of error, okay, that is a statistically tied race. So in a race this close, it's very, very close if that's the case. So could the polling change? Well, absolutely it could. I mean, we have to remember what also polling is. It's a snapshot in time at a particular moment. It's like looking at a photo album of a family vacation. This is us when we were driving down the road. This is us on the beach. This is us in the mountains. This is us before, you got bit by the by the jellyfish. Oh, or I'm sorry, stung by the jellyfish. And then, oh, here we are. Now you're stung by the jellyfish. You're no longer happy. That's what a poll does. It's measurement in a particular time period. And I want to say something about what's happened in the entire month of July for the polling in this race between Paxton and Tallarico. Tallarico led in all of them. We go back 8 years ago between the very competitive race between former Congressman of El Paso, Beto O'Rourke, the Democratic candidate, and Republican Senator Ted Cruz, who was running for re-election. Cruz led in all those polls, every single one of them. All right, there was only one poll that O'Rourke led in, and it was late in the race, and it turned out to be a bit of an outlier because not only did he never lead in another poll, he lost the election. When we look at the issue here with Tallarico, that's not the same story for this particular race. And what does that mean? Well, right now, it means that perhaps Tallarico is doing better than O'Rourke did 8 years ago. That perhaps Tallarico has molded himself to understand how to campaign in ways that O'Rourke didn't. Or maybe it's the fact that O'Rourke was able to kick the door open, be a trailblazer for future elections. That could possibly be the case. A lot of ideas here, okay? But I do want to say something that has happened with the Tallarico polling, and it's the fact that he has improved his lot with Black Texans. Remember, a few months ago, we were all looking at this going, man, that was a very high get. That was a very high receipt that he was getting from Black Texans that overshadowed O'Rourke back in April. Like April in 2018, O'Rourke did not have a very high approval or support from Black Texans, but his unknowns, his undecideds were very, very high. With Tallarico, his support was higher than his unknowns, and people thought, well, he's probably tapped out. I mean, he's probably reached his ceiling. That's a problem. But as it looks right now, from recent polling, from recent surveys that have been done, he has found his groove with Black Texans. And in this particular poll from Texas Southern University, he enjoys a 79% approval. 79%, I'm sorry, not approval, support from Black Texans. And again, that's massively higher than it was 3 months ago. It's also worth noting here that this could be very much in response to him going to places that were predominantly African American. That's helpful. Okay, I think he's learned from this, and he has to keep going. I mean, he's going to need about 83-85% support from Black Texans in order to possibly win this race. I mean, let's just be clear. Democrats can't win anything statewide without the base of the party showing up. And the base of the party is very much within Black Texans. The other thing I wanted to point to is Tallarico's support from Latino Texans. He's almost reaching 60%. I mean, according to the TSU poll, he enjoyed a 57% support from Latino Texans, from the Hispanic community. And it's higher than usual from the white voters, almost 40%. So these are numbers that are not great for Paxton, numbers that are really good for Tallarico. Let's also look at the education barrier because Tallarico does really well here. I mean, he leads in both of them. 4-year college degree, no 4-year college degree. Tallarico leads Paxton in both of those. And there's two other things I want to point to. I mean, yes, he has very high support from people in his own party. You would expect that. But Paxton doesn't. 85% of Republicans of respondents who identified as Republicans said they would support Paxton. 5% said they would support Tallarico. That's lower than what you would want. If you're in a partisan race, you need over 90% of your party to really show up here. That's not good for Paxton. The other thing here is the independent vote. 23% of independents, again, let me reword that. Respondents who identified as an independent, 23% said that they would vote for Kim Paxton. 63% said they would go for James Tallarico. 11% were unsure. That's pretty surreal. Okay? That is a massive lead. That's a massive hold that Tallarico has on the independent vote over Paxton. So, all of that to really say here, one more thing is the age gap. 18 to 54. The 18-year-olds to 54-year-olds, Tallarico leads that, and very sizably. The 55 plus is where Paxton brings home his money here. That's what's keeping him at 45%. That and white voters. That's what's keeping him there. That's what's making this race as close as it is. I mean, you can also say it's the fact of all the problems that Paxton brings. I mean, his flawed character campaign ability is exactly that. I mean, he's finally come up with an idea, and it's not that far off from what Democratic candidate for governor Gina Hinojosa wants to do. It's also very reminding of what Kamala Harris wanted to do, but but since there's an R next to his name, Republicans are fine with it. So that's the difference that you're finding here. That's what's keeping Tallarico slightly ahead in this very, very close race. This is incredibly close. This is going to come down to the wire here. And I would imagine this to keep evolving, keep being this close as we get closer to Election Day. There's a couple things I want to say about the poll here. I mean, this is the fourth poll in July that Tallarico leads Paxton, okay? What I'm really going to wait for are really two other polls that are going to come out. Probably one will come out in late September. The other one we'll have to wait on is from the New York Times and Siena poll, and the other one is the Texas Politics Project poll. I'm waiting on those two to see what really takes shape here, because those two polls have been very indicative about where the voters are. In the fact that they're had, later in the election cycle, it's a pretty good idea as to what's going to truly happen. The Texas Politics Project poll will probably poll people in mid to late September, and it'll come out in early October. And that's going to be a key indicator as to where we're going to see. And I don't think things are going to change all that much. I think we're seeing here a very close race for U.S. Senate. And that is going to be decided on the margins. That's a whole other conversation that I'll get into possibly next week. What I also wanted to spend a little bit of time on here is the governor's race. Are the other races that are statewide that don't get a lot of attention. And the one is the governor's race here. And you're seeing Greg Abbott, who's running for an unprecedented fourth term as Texas governor, against State Representative Gina Hinojosa. People kind of know who Abbott is, all right? It's not like that they don't know him well enough to not have an opinion, okay? He's got pretty solid name recognition, all right? And his favorables are 48%, unfavorable 51%. And Abbott leads Hinojosa by 6, 49 to 43. The problem that Hinojosa has, and you're going to see this with the other Democratic candidates, is that people just don't know her well enough. 35% of likely voters don't know about Hinojosa to have an opinion on her. Okay? With the remainder split between 37 who have a favorable opinion to 28% who don't. Who are unfavorable, let's put it to you that way. So 35% of respondents for the race for Texas governor don't know Hinojosa well enough to have an opinion. That's going to be an ongoing trend here. Same thing for Vicki Goodwin, and that's the lieutenant governor's race. She's down 7 to Dan Patrick. Again, you have a whole lot of people who don't know her well enough. I mean, we're talking close to 3/4 of respondents don't know Goodwin well enough to have an opinion. Yet Dan Patrick has very good name recognition. Vicki Goodwin does not. And then you get into Attorney General. Mays Middleton leads Nathan Johnson, 46-41. And what's interesting here is 77% don't know Johnson well enough to have an opinion, whereas close to half don't know Mays Middleton well enough to have an opinion. Again, name recognition is a thing here. You see the exact same thing happening for Texas Controller. Current Controller, Don Huffines, who's also a xenophobe, leads State Senator Sarah Eckhart by 7. Again, it comes down to not knowing who they are. About 49% don't know Huffines well enough to have an opinion, and almost 80%, almost 4/5 of respondents don't know Eckhart well enough. All right. You go down further here for Lands Commissioner, Don Buckingham. All right, leads Benjamin Flores by 5. Again, a majority of the respondents don't know either one of them well enough, but why does Buckingham lead so well? Because party identification. And then at the very least here you have Railroad Commissioner, which hardly anyone can tell you anything about. It does nothing to do with railroads, has everything to do with regulating oil and natural gas. Beau French, who we can clearly say with 100% confidence is a racist, leads the Democratic candidate John Rosenthal by 3. And again, you have 2/3 of people who don't know Beau French well enough to have an opinion. Over 4/5 don't know Rosenthal well enough to have an opinion. So that's the biggest problem that you're seeing here. For all these other Democratic candidates not named Tallarico, you have an ongoing issue of name recognition. And I think that's the biggest thing that people that you can take away from this, is that Mays Middleton, Huffines, French, all benefit from party label, even though hardly anyone's ever heard of them. They are riding the coattails of Greg Abbott, riding the coattails of Kim Paxton. They're kind of okay with these others. Well, I don't really know them all that well, but okay, fine. I kind of trust them a little more than I do the others. Whatever. That's your own thing. You can have that own thing, whatever. But this also speaks to James Tallarico leading the entire field of candidates, leading that ticket. That Tallarico has earned a lot of name recognition because he's been able to fundraise very, very well and use it, let alone the fact that Kim Paxton is an incredibly flawed candidate, not an admirable man. No one can say a whole lot of good things about him. And again, I don't need to go down that path. We all know this. I've beaten that drum about 6,000 times. But here's what Tallarico's going to have to do to raise these particular candidates their name recognition. He has to campaign with them. And what's being smartly done on the Republican side here in Texas is that's exactly what they're doing. You're actually seeing a little bit of a campaign tour. And I do want to say this. While they're doing this little campaign tour and that's helping their particular, name recognition and brand, they're all saying they're all saying negative things. We can't let Democrats win Texas. Oh, we can't let them win Texas. Oh, that Talarico guy is gonna, he's gonna make us eat vegan food, or whatever other kind of nonsense and malarkey that they want to throw out there. But it's all negative things. I'm not hearing any of the Republicans say, we have good tax, issues here. We have a very good, lucrative business climate. We need to, we have really good high-paying jobs here. We need to, we have the, really good schools, and we don't hear them say that. A lot of that is false because they can't say it. They can't say we have good schools here. We can't say we can keep teachers here. We can't say that our students are doing well. We can't say great things about the voucher program because none of those things are actually good. They can't argue about why they need to be there other than the fact that they can't let the other side win. That just speaks to how bad of a governing body you are. You have no good governance. You're not campaigning on the good things you did. All you're doing is saying the other side is bad. And we can't and we can't have them. One last thing about this polling is that there are those who don't buy into any of this. And they're scarred from 2016, they're scarred from 2020, and perhaps even 2022. And they think anybody who makes any hay of polling is some laughable noob. Well, here's what I have to say to those people. You got to roll your eyes at them. All right? These are the people who even if you told them that the sun is out, they'd say, no, it didn't. They would want to argue with you about the efficacy of sunlight. Or they probably would say that, we never really landed on the moon. It's all this crap. And I just want to ask them a question. What other way do you have in mind to measure public opinion? You can't solely take it from elections, as those measurements are slow. Not to mention outdated. The president still thinks he has an electoral mandate. He doesn't. This is the best way that we have to really measure public opinion between elections. Do they need to be improved? Yes. And 2024 had good polling. 2022 wasn't far off either. So if all you're going to do is just say, this is a bad poll, all the ones that show the candidate you don't like ahead is somehow a bad poll, okay. Then the truth is out there. And of course, there are those on the left who don't want Talarico to win. They want him to lose. And this is the ongoing problem that Democrats have. They'd rather be correct than win. And it's stupid. And they're out there. They're on social media. And, I'm not going to name names, but you can find them. They're not hard to find. They always want to pour cold water on any idea about Democrats or Talarico or anyone doing well. These are what we call whiners. And, I just have to laugh at them because it's just eye-rolling annoyance. But one good thing that Talarico can do with all this positive press is to spread it further down. He has promised to use some of the campaign money to help out lower ballot candidates. That's great. They need it. And this is going to be a consequential election based on what the 2027 legislative session will be in Texas. The control of Congress, checks and balances on this president, all of those things are at stake. So, let alone the fact that you have good ideas. So anyway, and that's one thing that the Republicans are doing is that they're campaigning as a ticket. That it just happened in North Texas. They're probably going to do it again in some other place. They are campaigning that they could possibly lose. One of the best political writers in Texas works for the Dallas Morning News. Gromer Jeffers Jr. he's really one of the best. He's been around for a long time. And he saw this. Despite the fact that the Republicans haven't lost an election in over 30 years, they are running like they can actually lose, and that's exactly what you want to do. They also have this other tactic where they don't talk about their opponent unless the opponent is worth of being mentioned. Texas House Speaker Dustin Burrows doesn't talk about his Democratic opponent because he has one. They just simply don't talk about him. It makes the voter think that no one else is running against them. Same thing goes for Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick. He doesn't talk about Vicki Goodwin. Why would you do that when that would take attention away from you? Governor Greg Abbott, he's not campaigning against State Representative Gina Hinojosa, who's his Democratic rival. He's not talking about her. He's enjoying very little success from it, but it's a strategy. Nonetheless, they're all going after Tallarico, which is eye-rollingly dumb, but whatever. But they're doing it all together. The Democrats could learn from that, and Tallarico's going to. I mean, it's up. I would say his campaign, and they need to coordinate with the others to get everyone kind of on the same page here. They should do that in other states too. It's really not that bad of an idea. With an unpopular president that we have right now, I mean, approval rating less than 40%. Sure, you definitely want to tie these very bad candidates with an unpopular president. It's a pretty smart thing to do. And the Democrats, this is an idea that they need to do. They actually need to copy the Republicans here. It's not a bad idea. As promised, I'm honored to have Dr. Arelia Johnson on the program. Dr. Johnson, thank you so much for being on the Outsider Podcast. It's an honor to have you on.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate being here. Good to see you on a Tuesday evening, Drew?
That's right. Yeah, I record here on Tuesdays, and it's good to see you too. Thank you so much. You have a book coming out called Hijacking Equity and the Fight for Justice. Let's talk a little bit about that. What caused you to want to write this?
So I sat in the, social justice, anti-racist space for a while. I was in government for the last 6-7 years of my career, and I, worked with people across the country. And the question with everyone. And the question with everyone was, what do we do? And so practitioners, community members, educators, parents all needed that answer, all needed that to be answered. And so this was my opportunity to answer that question.
Okay, so in the ongoing fight, I say fight, it's a conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Talk a little bit about how that plays into this, if it plays into this. I had an interview with Erica Harrison a couple of weeks ago, who is on social media, called Black Girls Who Brunch, and she talked about how those on the political left have essentially just abandoned the whole conversation, the whole debate as to what DEI is meant to do, and just kind of succumb to the Republicans on that. Do you agree with that? Do you and also do you think that is part of your work? And I'll let you answer that.
Yeah, absolutely. So Erica is someone that I absolutely trust in this space. Her voice is much, much needed right now. This book is the answer to the anti-DEI legislation that has taken hold across this country. Let me be very frank. Texas is one of those places who did not pass emphatic anti-DEI legislation outside of the bill banning DEI and higher education. But we did some implicit legislative work in the 89th legislative session, as well as what has taken place in Tennessee, what has now taken place in Arkansas, what is taking place in North Carolina. We've seen some very egregious and violent bills for people that do DEI work in the government space, in the higher education space, in community work. And this now has this attack is now impacting people's funding. And so you're seeing language now that is impacting people's ability to respond to the disproportionate and disparate impact on Black people and people of color, right? And so that is what this book is doing. It is providing people the opportunity to look at strategies that have been enacted across the country, across Texas as a state. And then now, how do you shift and pivot? How do you adopt and adapt in your respective places?
That's really great. I want to ask, like, because you mentioned thing about strategies. What exactly, like, what are a couple of strategies? Not to give the whole thing away, because you have a book to sell, and I totally understand that. But what are a couple of strategies that you would think would be helpful to in this endeavor?
So the main two takeaways in this book are one, distributive justice, which is the next iteration of what DEI could have been. It is the evolutionary process. So how Patricia Hill Collins came up with the domination matrix of oppression, and then Kimberly Crenshaw came behind her with intersectionality. This is now Dr. Johnson coming behind public and private sector DEI and saying distributive justice is the way that we need to go. And then the second component of that is joy is strategy. So we need to be innovative in this time. We need to be inclusive, multiracial, multi-generational, and we need to be very open. And so joy is a technology and innovation that people can use to resist. So those that are doing this work every day, they're not depleted by exhaustion. Joy provides them the space to be frustrated and thoughtful.
I want to just expand just a little more on that. From like a little blurb from your website, says that joy is strategy. This is a practitioner's guide to language, liberation, and leadership in a time of fear. Kind of help me understand what that joy is a tool, not a reward, as you would say here. If I don't want to misplace your words or anything like that, but kind of explain how that can be a tool in this particular endeavor, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so joy is our ability to look at life from a couple of different ways. One, it is an innovation strategy, right? How are we embedding joy in our political practices? Right? How are we embedding joy in our health? How are we understanding that joy is wealth? One of the things that people can do is really sit down and think about what can they implement in their lives by next Tuesday, right? So what can you do? What is one small incremental step that you can take and make in your life to bring yourself joy that would allow you the space to creatively think and to critically think? When anti-racist practitioners, social justice advocates, people that are in the political space, people that are on the ground doing this work, when they're doing it from a place of exhaustion, they no longer have allowed themselves the room to creatively think, right? They don't have the room or the capacity to think beyond what is happening in front of them. So they become reactive instead of proactive. And joy is strategy provides them that.
That's a really good point. Trying to be proactive. That's real creative. I think that is something that we should do instead of being more reactive in things. That's reactive seems more like of a human nature, and proactive is more of a thoughtful action. Am I just out to lunch on that?
No, I think that's exactly what it is. But I think that because of the cultural conditions that we have all been born and raised into, they teach us to react, right? To always be on your feet, to be on your heels, instead of allowing community the opportunity to think on their feet. We're reacting on our feet. And I think that's what keeps us in this constant state of flux. So we're just moving, right? And so one of the things that I talk about in the book is when you're not able to think creatively, it's just like you're in marching band, right? Like you're in JROTC, you're just sitting there marking time. It looks like you're making progress because you're moving, but in actuality, you're just expending energy standing in one place.
Okay, that's a really good analogy. Yeah, because that very good. I like that. Um, Let me ask you this on a political aspect. What would you look for from candidates when it comes to this particular side of just trying to people to get a fair shake? What do you look for in someone like State Representative James Tallarico or um, State Representative Gina Hinojosa. These are candidates. What applying from what you have just said, what do you look for from someone like them?
I'm looking for both of them to be thoughtful and intentional. I'm looking for both of them to really be engaged and active with the people. Now, I understand that they have to run a campaign, and campaigns run on money. Politics is fueled by money. There is an economic system that is working in the background. And at the same time, you want the job of working for the people. So you have to be responsive to the people. You have to be engaged with the people. And if you're not willing to do that beyond some superficial, shallow level, then you're going to run into the challenges and difficulties that you're running into now.
Okay, that's that's great. I also want to ask you here. When we talk about joy as a strategy, when we talk about the aspects of distributive justice, um, kind of explain as to like how does that apply? I mean, you may have already explained this, and I forgive me for trying to re-ask the question. You you said how distributive justice is kind of like the next step after DEI. Like help me understand what that particularly means.
So, as a sociologist, I was trying to look at the world either in three different lenses, right? Either I'm looking at it, what is the function of society? What is people's function in society? I'm looking at the conflict that is caused by the structure that is in place, or I'm looking at how people are interacting and making meaning out of it, right? And we're told we have to choose one. I'm not. I am taking all of them and combining them and being influenced by Soyinka's fourth space. So this is the fourth space of that. So it is taking account the structure as well as taking account the individual experiences of people's lives, how they are showing up in community, how they are becoming, how their identities are being formed, and how bonds are being formed in the structure within conflict, as well as how are they making meaning of that. So distributive justice provides us with the opportunity to look at everything holistically instead of saying we have to be either or, right? Reinforcing the binary. I'm saying that we can step outside of the binary. We can really look at it on the spectrum. We can look at it in a multi-directional way, and it provides us with having a more complete analysis. So let me give you a more concrete example. If I'm looking at distributive justice in county government, and particularly in, let's say, Harris County, who has the highest rates of Black mortality rates in the United States, right? So Black women die in birth more in Harris County than anywhere in the nation. From a distributive justice lens, we're looking at what has been medical racism. We are looking at how economics play and contribute. We are looking at cultural competency. We're also looking at the individual health factors of the mom that is coming into that are coming into the hospital to give birth. All of those things are being considered at the same time and saying, listen, in order for you to solve for this particular health crisis that we are experiencing, you're going to have to acknowledge the historicity of medical racism, right? You're going to have to acknowledge that even though these individuals are being trained to be professional medical personnel, to be doctors, there's still some blind spots that have to be accounted for. How are you then embedding that into your curriculum? How are you embedding that into your training and development? And then how are you going out into community to make sure that those women are receiving the type of services that they need so they can have healthy babies and healthy pregnancies?
Right. Thank you so much for expanding on that and giving some really good examples. My wife is Hispanic, and she has experienced this, the very same thing that you have described, and it's really, really sad because I don't. And that's even more sad. I and also infuriating and a lot of other things. I want to ask you here because you bring out some very solid, concrete examples here. What kind of policies would you advocate for to try to address those issues?
I think that we need to have one of the things I'll say about this is everything here is rooted in economics. We like to say that, class doesn't exist, but it does, and it has an impact on people's lives, and that race is going to be the mitigating factor because of how our society has been formed, because of the historical evolution, right, and the founding of this particular society. We have to recognize that there are social hierarchies that are baked into the system. How are we coming out with policies, health policies, public health policies? How are we coming out with economic policies? There's an attack right now on historically underutilized businesses, right? How are we coming out with policies that are actually going to protect people and say the hard thing? And yet what we're doing is we're playing defense against policies that are actually divisive. We're playing defense against policies that are steeped in racism and social stratification, as well as I was on the roll there, Drew, as well as anti-blackness. How do we then get politicians in office that are going to say the hard thing and work with people across the aisle who do have a different political orientation? I'm not talking about MAGA Republicans. I'm talking about Republicans who just orient different in their political ideologies and beliefs, right? And then have them to have a conversation and debate back and forth about what kind of policy can we create that will take care of the entire state, that will take care of the 50 states, at the federal level, that will take care of the nation.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That's fantastic. I think those are achievable goals that require some brave leaders, and you know, it's one of the biggest frustrations for me was from the 2024 election that came from that was how suddenly it was like, well, okay, we can have a societal reset on what things are and in education. I mean, you and I both have a very rich history in education. I mean, you have furthered yours than mine, and I admire your work. But when I discuss aspects of history of this country, it is absolutely ridiculous if I don't talk about how slavery played a big part in founding this country. And if I do, somehow I become some sort of a woke person who's indoctrinating people. And this is what I often like to tell those critics is you may be hearing a little bit of a sound bite, but come to my classroom and you'll hear it in full context, and you'll actually understand that it is a bigger problem than what you may actually believe in your whole little sheltered mindset. That really bothers me that somehow that is okay to suddenly say that we don't need to talk about slavery. It's no big deal. Everyone's just kind of overreacting. I'm not a person of color. I don't know what it's like to ever be like that. And I'm neither am I a woman. I don't know what it's like to be a woman, but I can listen and I can try to understand. And so when you hear this sort of silly rhetoric, um, uh, how do you respond to that? Not react, but how do you try to respond to that? And as a very educated person who has written so many thoughtful pieces and has done tremendous work on this, how do you respond to that?
I think a couple of ways. One, woke became a four-letter word after Governor DeSantis decided that he wanted to go on this anti-woke campaign, right? Not really understanding the culture that produced wokeness, neither understanding the original definition of wokeness, right? It was just something that was easy. It was a four-letter word, right? And so we're talking about education. the average reading level and comprehension and literacy level of Americans. So he grabbed on something that was easy to remember and that was, being thrown around, in the culture, and then being capitalized on in mainstream culture. And so he was able to then demonize and weaponize that word. It's the same thing, same playbook with diversity, equity, and inclusion. You don't hear people saying all three words. What you hear people saying is DEI because it's easy to remember, right? And so then they came up with the opposite of it, which was MEI. Right, which is a bunch of foolishness. It's a bunch of mediocre men coming up with tropes, or with anthems and words that are steeped in racist and sexist tropes because they do not want to recognize that they have been successful despite their mediocrity. That's number one. Number two, when we're talking about education, you never want to educate the masses of people beyond your ability to control them. That's everybody, right? So yes, it's rooted in chattel slavery, which is very different from the ancient forms of slavery. When slavery got here to the American shores, there was a commodification and objectification of people. There was no way for those people to then integrate themselves fully into the society. They were property. That was the point of it. And I think a lot of people miss that, right? And so when you're talking about giving a full education of that and the breadth and depth of what has happened in this country, and you have cloaked yourself in mediocrity and you've protected yourself, right, in all of the false narratives and your own indoctrination into what supremacy is, then fairness then feels like a threat. Right? You can have a real conversation about what fair is, especially if you have been positioned racially, right, phenotypically, to think that you are ahead of somebody because they look different than you do. Right. So there was a whole thing about that in the populist movement in the United States, right, where there were poor workers, Black people and white people coming together to actually say, hey, we're all being messed over in this system. Like all these rich white folks are exploiting us, and they are making grand theft money because of the exploitation of the both of us. So now you have to interject this mechanism of division, which is, hey, don't you forget that you're white, and white is better, and white is correct, and white is right. And so not only did the poor white people believe it, but then the poor Black folks believed it. And it was just reinforced from hundreds of years of psychological conditioning. So that's why education and educational policy, especially when you're talking about here in Texas, what they're doing now with this bluebonnet curriculum and the testing and what is happening in our classrooms. And now, again, you are hoarding our kids who have special education needs in rooms like cattle. You're treating them like property because you get a particular amount of money for each one of those kids that are sitting in your classroom. That's funding, right? So we're not talking about the dehumanization of that and how that is related to history and how it's just now showing up in a different kind of form. So I think that's why there was an attack on wokeness and why there is an overall attack on education.
I was ready to run through a wall when you got going. I am so inspired right now. I want to run all throughout this entire neighborhood, and because I couldn't agree more. I mean that I am totally on the same page there. So just um I hate to say to wrap this up, but how would you how can people get in contact with you? How can people find you? And can they pre-order your book? And I'd love for you just to kind of promote that just for a moment, if you don't mind.
No, thank you, Drew. I appreciate that opportunity. So you can find me on all social media at Arelia Johnson, PhD. So Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, Blue Sky, all of it. LinkedIn, all of it at Arelia Johnson, PhD. I do have an event that is coming up in Houston, Texas on September 21st. It is at the Match Theater Your ticket to that event includes a signed copy of my book. It also includes a networking event. So we're talking about an evening of joy, justice, and leadership, and it will be co-moderated with Sasha Leggett of Black Girl Caucus. So please come out. Don't think that if you show up differently, if your sexual orientation is different, if your gender identity is different, if your racial identity is different, that you're not welcome. You are absolutely welcomed. And then you can find more information about me on my website at www.areliajohnson.com.
Awesome. Dr. Johnson, it's an honor to have you on here. I learned so much in the time that we were together on this program. Thank you so much for being on here. Thank you for improving the quality of this podcast. Thank you so very much.
I appreciate you, Drew. Thank you for all that you're doing, and keep up the fight, good brother. We really, really appreciate you. We need voices like yours.
Thank you. All right, folks, that's all from me for this week. A very special thank you to Dr. Arelia Johnson for joining the Outsider Podcast. Go make sure that you find her book coming out next week. It'll be a good read for all of us. Thank you so much for watching and listening. And remember now, if you or someone you know would like to be a guest on the show, don't hesitate to shoot me an email at the.outsider806@gmail.com, folks. And remember, this is a political show, so just bear that in mind. So you may have some really good ideas as to what you want to talk about. That's fine, but we have to keep it on the political end. So if you're Talking Dog Lassie wants to talk politics, let's get him on. I mean, you don't have to agree with me to be on the program. That can kind of make an interesting show. But that said, if you want to get on here and talk some politics with me, the.outsider806@gmail.com is the place to send that request. All right. Thank you again so very, very much for watching and listening, and I'll see you again very, very soon.
The preceding analyses and opinions were that of Drew Landry and his alone. They did not necessarily reflect all of his podcast listeners or newsletter readers. Thank you for listening to the Outsider Podcast. Be sure to follow The Outsider on X and on Facebook. Also, don't forget to sign up to be a free subscriber to his newsletter on Substack. Just look for The Outsider. We will see you again next time.